Hey folks, another edition of Cape Ann Today coming your way. We have a very special one-off interview with new Gloucester School Superintendent Ben Lummis. He talks about all things as the entire administration preps for this school year, including what they're going to do about cleaning cafeterias, school bus routes, hybrid classes or not. I don't know. Well, this was a pretty meaty interview, Heather.
Yeah, so there's hybrid, there's remote, and the cafeteria is one of the biggest issues that the school system is facing.
Hi, Heather. Thanks for having me on today. I'm just so glad to be here in Gloucester. One thing I want the community to know is just how hard all of us at the Gloucester Public Schools are working to get our schools open safely. It's so important for our kids to be back in school. We know that's where they learn best. We know that's where they have a safe, fulfilling day. Our schools support their mental health, their social health, their physical health. So we know that our families and our staff are concerned about safety, but we're really doing our best to make sure it's a safe opening and we can get as many kids back in school as possible. We're really looking, another thing I want the community to know is that we're really looking and working very closely with the Gloucester Department of Health and watching very, very closely the health numbers. And by working with Karen Carroll there, the director of public health, we know that Gloucester is just doing so well on COVID, and it's been doing very well for a long time. And because the Gloucester is doing so well and community transmission is so low right now, and better than most of the state really, that we know at this point it's safe for kids to be back in school. And so we're working really hard to get all the details worked out and trying to communicate with families and our staff to make sure we start school well on September 16th.
And you actually sent out a couple of surveys. You surveyed families, the families of kids in Gloucester schools and staff. Do you want to talk about those results?
Sure, yeah. In terms of our family survey, they came back, and this was in late July, that 80% of families want to return in person in some way. And that was, at that point, that was either fully in person, so a regular school day, or what we call a hybrid option, which is partly in school day and partly remote learning from home. And that was split about half and half of the 80% who wanted to be back in school. But that's just a tremendous number. And we're seeing that still, that while parents are concerned and they want more details, understandably, and they want to make sure their kids are safe, that they really want to get back in school. They know that's where it's best for their kids. In terms of our staff survey, one of the most relevant questions was, how do you want to return? And we gave them 3 options, which was all in person, all remote learning, or hybrid. And I think if I remember correctly, 66%, 2/3 wanted to come back all in person or a hybrid version, which is partly in person, partly remote. So that's really good information. We also what's important there is we had very good response rates. So I think it was well over about 70% of staff responded, which is a very high rate, and a comparable number of families responded too about their children. So that was some good information we got and helped us in our planning.
Is there any idea on a potential start date for the school year, or are different dates being played with?
Sure, yeah, so school starting later this year than it has in the past. It's starting on September 16th for students. And that's because the state's Department of Education granted or required all communities to have a shorter year, which helps us by having 10 days in the beginning of the year for our staff to be in schools doing planning, preparation, and professional development. So we're ready. Because there are lots of changes for our staff, but also for our students.
So they will actually be in the building in those 2 weeks of planning for the school year.
That is the expectation right now. They'll be in the building. We may have some combination of remote learning as well as in the buildings, but folks really need to be in the buildings. And they'll just like office buildings are operating. This is our workplace, and workplaces are open. We will abide by the safety protocols we're putting in place. So people will be wearing masks, and if we're inside, they'll be apart from each other as needed be. But yeah, we expect folks will be in for the most part working on those days. Yes.
So the biggest component I understand, or the biggest obstacle in this year you're looking at, is the remote learning, and because there will, even if you go with a hybrid model, there will be a component of remote learning, right?
Yeah.
So how have educators been planning for that? Because they were
Sure.
totally they were taken totally off guard last spring.
Yeah, that's a big obstacle. I'm not sure that that's the biggest obstacle, honestly.
Yeah,
There
that's
are a lot
true.
of big
Yeah,
obstacles. So,
right.
but let me talk before I get to that, is I think the real big obstacle is all the operational logistics
Mm.
around getting kids to school, having them in school, adjusting our schedules. We're going to be offering, our hybrid version at all levels, but then also a remote version for those families who don't feel comfortable. And so that combination is much more complicated than what we did in the springtime, And then focusing on your question, then there's remote learning piece specifically, okay? So if you think about we're having in school and we're having remote at the same time, that's incredibly complex and more complex than the springtime. Getting to the remote piece, so we've had teams at each grade span, so preschool, elementary, middle school, and high school, working on this since June. And they've come up with training on our technology platforms. They've come up on how, developing trainings. And this is what part of what we'll be doing in those 10 days before school starts. How to use Google, how to use a platform called Seesaw, how to organize a lesson, how to check in with students, how to organize a live class and tape that. So they've been doing planning and preparation this summertime, and many of our teachers have been involved in professional development this summertime on that, and that'll continue in those 10 days of planning and preparation before school starts. But one of the big changes on remote learning is it'll be much more scheduled like a school day. So in the spring, it was much more, it wasn't a full schedule for a student, whereas this time they'll have a class schedule with specific times for specific classes, just like they have when they're in the normal school day. And we'll have a combination of live or what we call synchronous learning, so live teaching. Okay, we'll have small groups as well. That's actually has proved quite helpful and effective. So a teacher working with a small group of students, sort of on a Zoom call, maybe while other students are then working on their own during that same time. And then we'll also have recorded lessons, and we also have developed or signed on with a couple of computer-based platforms, which students can also do work on those, can be assigned work on those as well. So it'll have more specific components, and it'll have better scheduled, and also attendance is going to be required, so kids really know they've got to show up.
So I just want to repeat that one point you said at the beginning. So any child can choose to go all remote, or any family can.
Yes, and
vulnerable at all.
That's right. Any family or child can choose to go remote. We have those forms out right now at the elementary and middle school. We're working on the preschool one as well. And so they can select if they want to be in the hybrid option, which is, for our elementary and middle school, the hybrid options are actually have a lot of time in school with their teachers. But if that isn't okay for a family, they can choose the remote option, yes.
And what precautions are being taken for spots such as like the cafeterias, school buses, bathrooms?
Yeah. So no matter where our kids are, we're going to have very very well-defined safety protocols. So it starts with face coverings and masks. And that's really an essential piece, learning from Karen Carroll. This is such an important piece of safety during the COVID era. So kids grades 2 through 12 have to wear masks and face coverings all throughout the day. We will have mask breaks for them so they can take those off. And that can be, when they're far enough away from other kids or they're outside. Maintaining physical distance is very important. So we are following the State Department of Education guidelines. And they say when kids have masks, they need to be 3 feet or further apart. Well, 3 feet is the minimum, absolute minimum. In most places in our schools, our kids will be 4 or 5 or 6 feet apart at least with masks. We'll have hand hygiene is super important. This is one of these things we really learned all together. So kids will have hand washing breaks and hand sanitizing breaks. We're installing hand sanitizing stations outside all of our classrooms and in our common areas, in all of our school buildings. We'll also have medical waiting rooms. So if a child does have symptoms, we have a designated room where that child goes and waits to be picked up, or until they can be picked up by a family member. And then we're also doing quite a bit of work with our facilities. So Just the last few weeks here, the Department of Public Works, this week especially, are getting in a team of professionals to analyze our existing systems, see how they can be adjusted, see what add-ons we need for both getting more fresh air into our buildings, but also disinfecting that as it's going through our systems. So, and because one of the key things here is getting more fresh air into our buildings, and so we're working on that as well. You also asked about cafeterias. We actually won't be serving lunch. That's one of the areas that schools, including our own, have found it most difficult to keep those safety protocols in place. So our school days, while we'll have all of our middle school and elementary school students in school almost every day, 4 or 5 times a week, they will be, the day will be a little shorter, and they'll be let go just before lunch and be able to take a take-home lunch with them. So those are some of the things we're working on, but to make sure kids are safe and nothing's being transmitted.
Very nice.
So you had to present this report to the state by, I think, last Friday. Is that right?
Yes.
And it sounds as if you presented, every district had to present this report, and now you're still trying to fine tune it. And I think you're still working with the teachers unions. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's so many operational pieces here. Like I said before, how are kids? How do they get into the buildings? How do they arrive? How are they dismissed? Excuse me. How they walk through the hallways. What's the setup in the classroom? Another real issue here or challenge is, a number of staff members may have to take leaves, from teaching, because they might have medical conditions, or they may not be able to teach this year in the schools. So maybe they're available for remote learning options. So a lot of those questions, or some of those questions actually I talked about, especially on staffing, have to be worked through with the teachers union, the Gloucester Teachers Association. So those negotiations are underway now. They won't be easy. There are a lot of important questions to work out, but I'm committed to working through these things, as we can, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to. But we're running out of time, so we got to work pretty quickly and try and do our best on that.
So from what I understand, one of the biggest questions that even the state has not answered is what happens when there is a COVID outbreak in a school system, or a case that may be in question.
Yeah, actually they have given us very clear protocols on those. Yeah, as early as mid-July, July 17th. And so those are part of our plan. They're referenced in our plan. They're going up on our website today, I believe. By the time this broadcast will be up there. But it's really specific in terms of if there's a symptom for the staff member or a symptom for a student, they lay out all the symptoms that to look for. What happens at that point if a student has a symptom? They go to the nurse, they go to the medical waiting room. How long they've got to quarantine for, whether they test or not, that sort of thing. What happens if there's that sort of case on a bus? What happens if we find out that someone had a positive case and they were in a classroom? So all those have been laid out pretty clearly. Just yesterday, on August 19th, they revised some of those as well. So they're being updated as well. And that was in response to some questions that local departments of public health had. So those are in place. And now what we have to make sure we do is make sure that the teachers understand them clearly, but also especially the families do. Because I think that knowing what those are will add some comfort to families that, we're staying on top of things, but we also know how to address them when they come up.
Yeah, that seems like a really critical part. And Corey, what do you got?
Yeah, well, but we had heard about a month or so ago that the schools were talking with the YMCA about either after school activities happening there, or a holding spot for kids waiting for rides. Or I want to get into that a bit, what's going on there, and what's problematic with childcare.
Sure, these are two really important issues: after school and childcare. And after school, typically we'll have the Y in our buildings at the end of the school day, after 2:30 or so, and they're working with 30 to 50 kids in any given school, which is a great service to the community and those families and that the Y provides. We haven't worked this out yet because if you think about it, two things. the school day, the in-person school day ends for most students at around, say, in elementary school, okay, where the Y supports us, at around 12 or 12:30. But there's still a number of kids who will continue the full school day. Our high needs learners, so students with significant special ed needs, special education needs, or students who are just, just learning English, or students who had real trouble with remote learning last year. Those students will have a full school day in our buildings. So it's very complicated for us to, and that, because the end of the school day isn't really till 2:30, but most kids have left, okay? The other piece is, just in terms of our distancing, one of the key areas on our safety protocols is not mixing up cohorts of students. What I mean by that in elementary is you have a homeroom class, you want to keep that homeroom class together and not mix it with other homeroom classes. And you really don't want to mix it with other grades. But what we typically do in after school is we do just that. We mix kids from grades. So that's another complication that we haven't worked out yet, honestly. So both can we use the space for after school in terms of safety and health and cleanliness, but can we also, how does really the Y staff it in a way that allows those cohorts of students to stay clear basically and not mix. So those are two really big challenges which we've been talking to the Y about, but are having difficulty solving, honestly. And then the childcare challenge, this is really the case for, so many businesses. With the schools being in remote or, remote for portion, and I don't mean just Gloucester at this point, but other communities that are fully remote or doing very little in person, that's a challenge for those families. We've been working with our community-wide, we have a community-wide partners group that's been working, and again, trying to figure out what's possible here, but not coming up with any clear answers. I wish I could say that there was some real tangible solution we have yet, but it's something we're still working through. What we know so well is that the schools, they really, in addition to educating kids very well, we provide a tremendous service to families of, allowing them to work in the home or work outside the home while we are, working with their students. And that's much more difficult in the era of COVID, very, very difficult.
Is it still too early to comment on extracurricular activities and clubs or the MIA's decision to allow fall sports?
Right. So just yesterday, MIA voted to have fall sports. They have put these into different, tiers or categories. So something like golf is possible. Something like or cross country is possible. Basketball and football are not until further notice. They may happen, if possible, in the springtime or later in the year if things get better. So we're just had that guidance as of yesterday, sorting through it. Our athletic director, Brian LaFata, told families earlier in the week that this information was coming, and now he's in the process of putting together plans and communication to families. We do know that sports like practices won't start before September 18th, I believe it is. So we still have some time to work out those details.
Gotcha. So, and lastly, Ben, I just want to ask how you're doing. I mean, this is baptism by fire for you. I mean, of all times to start anew.
Well, I'll say this, it's very, very challenging for all of us. It's been great to come into Gloucester, and people have been fantastic to me. Just so many people who are, who really care deeply about our schools and our families and our children. And I mean, not only people, but their organizations that they run, or they work for. So that's been really easy and wonderful to sort of be welcome into this community. But this is very hard. This is hard for our staff, for our families. It's hard personally, but I'm just one person. It's challenging for all of us. So, but I'm really pleased with the team we have. All the folks that I've been working with, teachers, guidance counselors, speech and language specialists, our principals, obviously, the team here at the district office. They're working so hard. They're so committed. If it wasn't, if I had a different group of folks I was working with, this would be a much, much harder position than it already is. So, but I'm super pleased to be here and super pleased to be working with the whole team.
Well, what attracted you to Gloucester to begin with?
Well, So when you're applying for a superintendency, you're looking for a community that's a good fit, and is interested and is interesting to you in terms of, what it is and the people who live there, and especially the families, right? And so, Gloucester has always been, I've known about Gloucester and been coming to Gloucester for a long time because I've got family in the area. And so, first of all, I knew Gloucester well. I knew it as a place that was, just very diverse in so many ways. Diverse socioeconomically, diverse ethnically and racially, diverse in terms of an incredibly diverse history, all for literally since 1623, okay, or even before that, obviously. So, and then you look for a place that was looking for a place that, has some real challenges in terms of its schools, but has a good foundation. And so that's what I was interested in Gloucester.
Uh-oh.
Working together, who really cared about the families and the students and the schools, and who were doing well by them and wanted to do even better. And people were open and friendly, and engaging and welcoming. And so that sort of, then I became really interested because it just seemed like so many great people in such a great place that people cared a lot about. So it had some of those basics I look for in terms of challenge, diversity, commitment, and then it had the added benefits of great people, great commitment, and real investment, and a community that really cares about its school. So it was actually a great experience to go through the process, and I made the right choice, and I still think other people think they made the right choice too, I hope.
That's great. Well, we have about a minute or so left, Ben. Are there any upcoming dates or announcements of importance that parents need to be aware of?
Yeah, I would just say two things. One, parents, please keep looking to your emails, okay, and the phone calls. You'll mostly be getting communication from your principals going forward here. So really pay attention to that information coming from your principals, okay? The other thing to the whole community is Gloucester is in great shape now, and we're in great shape in terms of health and COVID because we've been doing a great job of taking care of each other. So I really urge the community, our families, but that are in school, but families across the city, to keep doing that good work of taking care of each other. Between now and the September 16th, whether we can stay safe and stay healthy really will impact whether we can open the schools for our kids. So I just urge folks to keep on doing what they're doing, wearing masks, taking care of their families, taking care of each other, and that will really help us open schools. So just keep up the great work.